While we're waiting to start, a couple of logistics items. Tomorrow, we will be sending out the recording for this webinar as well as the presentation itself. We do have QA functionality on this webinar. We're all familiar with those, having been on so many webinars. Please feel free to jump on it with any questions you have. This is a popular webinar for us every year, and sometimes it begins a conversation around deep dive summer planning for a student, which we love to do, but probably means that we need to grab some real time with a student or a family as opposed to doing it on the fly on a webinar. Okay, we'll jump right in. We are so excited to be with you today. We are, of course, ESM Prep College Matchpoint. My colleagues and I are going to spend the next hour really trying to orient you to some of the critical decisions and opportunities in front of you. We have a fabulous mix of college counselors and test prep experts, and we really are going to try to frame some of the critical choices we think are important for students to consider. In terms of our focus, obviously, we are a company focused on college counseling and the journey to college, but ultimately, we believe that summers are all about students thriving in college, that the opportunity to deepen their engagement and to really make connections during the summer can ultimately be one of the primary contributors to a student thriving in college. In terms of our agenda, it's sort of your classic journalist who, what, when, where, how. We really are going to try to give you some tools that you can practically use with students, as well as what we think are some of the critical choices you're going to want to consider. I'm going to start us off with a little bit of a context on why summer is such a great opportunity. Several years ago, the Gallup organization did a fabulous study around what does it mean for a student to thrive. And there are sort of mile markers, hallmarks of thriving. A student is able to do things that connects to her aptitudes. A student works with an adult other than their parents who sees them for their unique skills or gifts. And a student is able to reflect on her activities. And that study indicated that students who are deeply engaged are more likely to excel in the classroom and they're more likely to be hopeful about the future. Now, in terms of summer, there's sort of some classic myths. My student is going to a pre college program at an Ivy League school. It will give them a leg up. It won't. I mean, the truth is that those are two different parts of a school and they really don't map over, which leads us to our second myth. I just need to pay a lot of money for my student to go away. That hasn't been the case with traditional summer camps, and it certainly isn't the case with extracurricular academic summer camps. We're going to try to focus on some of the wonderful free opportunities, and on our website, we spotlight these. The next myth is it's all about hours. My student needs to gain X number of service hours. And we are huge fans of that for either families or schools that set that as a goal. But that really has not been our experience as the outcome that students that we work with focus on. We'll wait until July or August to have a plan. That's awfully hard, and it makes for a sprint for students. And we don't think any parts of the journey to college are a sprint. I think it's more like a triathlon. You need a plan. You're going to use lots of different skills and lots of different approaches. Speaking of the journey to college, I had a student the other day tell me, well, my next door neighbor got into Yale and they did this, this, and this. I'm just going to do what they did. That somehow this is a recipe, a checklist, Google Maps. Trust us. We are lucky enough to work with students who are at highly competitive schools, and we have never found an experience where students certainly copies the extracurricular profile of a fellow student and excels. Um, We are massive fans of summer jobs. We'll just sort of say that unambiguously. For teenagers, it can make a huge impact and it can be an opportunity for them to develop skills. And that doesn't have to be paid, that can be volunteer work. And for students who are interested in different majors, that can also be with a family company or organization. And then the last myth, and I hope we'll disprove this over the next 50 minutes or so, I just can't find any options. Now, in our experience in college admissions, we have oftentimes seen that the showcase, the centerpiece of a student's application is the activities they did during their summers. We can point to specific examples of students who were able to chain together activities that they first discovered they loved during the school year, but they ultimately were able to take advantage of the time and flexibility in the summer to go deep, deep, deep. Given that, what we've come to see is that these summer opportunities provide students with a unique opportunity to demonstrate leadership. And we're often anxious about using the term leadership because it often translates to they're elected to something. Informal leadership, in many ways, during the summer has an even greater impact. You'll hear a lot of discussion by my colleagues about depth versus breadth. We think that sustained involvement really can make a difference, particularly if the student is applying to a school that really prioritizes college major. And then finally, we really want to urge you to follow a student's interests. Don't try to guess what looks good to a college. We're always disdainful, frankly, of any sentence that starts with what colleges really want to see is dot, dot, dot. Because the most important thing is for a student to thrive in the summers that she plans. Now, over the last several years, we worked with students on a model that we found incredibly effective, and that's called an I-4 model. And at the center of that is what should be the guide for summer activities, the students' aptitudes, skills, and motivators. What we found over the last several years is that many 8th and ninth graders use summer to explore interests. Starting in the ninth grade, it's natural to get more involved, to see opportunities where you really want to build on those interests and get more engaged. And for those of you on this Zoom that are focused on college admissions, I would really underscore that the distinctive for college admissions is initiative and impact. Where did a student's involvement indicate they took a step up? And for many students, they looked at the lasting impact, the legacy, the difference that they made in the communities that they're a part of. Before I turn it over to my colleagues, I do want to remind you that our website has over 1,200 opportunities listed of summer activities organized by major. We provide this for free because we know it's awfully hard to do the research and find all the different activities. With that as context, I want to turn it over to my colleagues, Allison and Delara, to talk about the wide variety of types of summer opportunities.
Thanks so much, Bob. So again, as we go through these, this is not an exhaustive or an exhausted list. It's basically just some common categories of summer activities, and there are as many other options for summer activities as there are humans, because as we said, it's a student's curiosity, interest that is the driver here. But just to kind of orient everyone, there are some kind of common categories that you may have heard of and you may not have heard of. Summer, there are great summer courses and pre-college programs at universities all over the country. We're going to be talking in depth a little bit more about each of these types as we go forward. Independent research can be something a student does on their own with a teacher or mentor, and there are also paid mentor programs that we talk about that might sponsor a student in doing some research or an independent project. There are tons of online classes, whether these are through a community college or through a platform that offers students the opportunity to explore and skill build, as well as, you know, summer camp, as we said, summer jobs, service, internships. I always want to point out that I wish we had a different word that we could use for high school students who are basically doing some in-depth shadowing. We refer to these as internships, but as adults, our understanding of internships is quite different than what colleges expect from high school students, which is really 1 to 2 weeks of time spent shadowing, observing, and likely running social media in a professional environment. And so when we do talk about internships, we're talking about the high school version of these, not, you know, a paid opportunity at Google necessarily. Awesome. Next slide. And the list goes on. I will say, there's a great question just came in actually, is if like, which one's better, right? Which one is better? Is community service better than community college? Is that better than camp? 100% it's dependent on the student, right? What they're most interested in, what they're most curious about. And I will take us back to what Bob said, initiative and impact, right? That's a great way to discern for your student, where is the place that they could either take initiative, make an impact, or what would be the most impactful on them. That is a great way to kind of discern what is the best opportunity for my student, because ultimately it is the student's experience. These are growth experiences, right? These are categories of growth experiences. The more the student experiences, reflects, and, you know, develops as the course of these, that's what makes them powerful, right? And so that's kind of a non-answer, but it is important to kind of take your student first and figure out what kind of growth or skills would be really impactful at this age. Slide. It's definitely not one size fits all, right? As we've said, it's summer activities are as individual as they are students. Also, just for fun, it doesn't have to be during summer. We typically focus on summer because summer is when students have more time. But if that isn't the case for your student, I just met with a student yesterday that actually is going to have a little more time in February than they're going to have in the summer. And so they're going to go ahead and shadow a family friend that has a career that they've heard about but don't really know much about. And so that's a good starting point for them. There may be students that already have such a busy school year. They don't need a really jam-packed summer. And so again, we're looking at the growth arc. Our students having growth experiences, are they having the opportunity to explore interests and be curious and develop skills? If that happens during the school year, you may not need a super jam-packed summer. Community service is, I am a super nerd about community service. And I think there is a myth that Bob mentioned that I'm going to mention again, that a good summer plan for a student has to cost a ton of money. Absolutely not. The more individualized it is, in fact, is the better. And community service can be typical kind of philanthropy, direct service, but it also could be, there is a student that I've worked with who realized that the students in the dance team needed more help the year before they applied. And so she just started giving some lessons to kids who might want to be on the dance team. That's also service. That's also common good. And in addition to all sorts of on-site direct service programs, there's also a ton of online opportunities, which can be really helpful for kids because they're flexible. I also love a great online opportunity because it's kind of low investment, high reward, and easy to get in and out of. So if you're if you think you're really interested in a particular topic and you do an online research project with Zooniverse and you realize, oh, this really has nothing to do with what I thought it was, really easy to dip out of that and try something else. And also try a bunch of different things, or just have a flexible schedule where you don't have to commit to something. Maybe you don't know the dates of when you're going to be the camp counselor, and so you don't want to sign up for a summer program. The online opportunities have really, really exploded since the COVID lockdown, and continue to be really robust. A lot of them are teen-led, again, and really creative. There are some that involve real science research with real scientists that just need like regular humans to help. Others involve like helping transcribe archived documents from history in the Smithsonian, so they can be really interesting and really cool and super flexible. All right, Delara, I'm gonna hand it off to you to tell us about summer jobs.
Awesome. Thank you, Allison. So
Okay.
as Bob mentioned at the start of our webinar, we are big fans of summer jobs. Summer jobs are an incredibly valuable way to spend the summer. And colleges think so too, although that isn't necessarily our focus, because of the skills that students learn while they're on the job. They learn responsibility, accountability, how to show up someplace on time and act like a professional, how to interact with people of all sorts of different age and demographic areas. And oftentimes students really enjoy their jobs because it gives them a sense of independence, and they get to earn some money to spend on, whatever it is that they're looking forward to. I want to share a story about one of my students who was able to really interestingly pivot her job to serve as a fit to major experience, an experience that proves her interest and commitment to her particular major. So this student was interested in majoring in marketing, and she worked at Amy's Ice Cream here in Austin, Texas. And her job was, scooping ice cream, serving customers. One thing she noticed at her job is that every season there were always one or two flavors that just wouldn't sell, and they would just, take up space in the ice cream corral, and they just wouldn't move. So she came up with really inventive recipes on her own that she was able to pitch to customers as they came in to start moving product. And she was able to do so really effectively. And that's something we were able to document on her resume as part of her marketing experience, but it also showed a particular aptitude for that subject that indicated that she would be successful should she pursue that as a major. So while jobs are great, they can also serve several functions for students. Ooh, internships. Okay, internships, as Allison mentioned, can be a little bit tricky, or rather, the way we think about them requires a little bit of a shift. So if your student is looking for a hands-on experience in a particular major, a career, if they're curious about a particular industry, an internship can be an incredible option. But it isn't the kind of internship you're looking for, where you go on Indeed or LinkedIn, submit an application, sit for an interview, then you get paid or get college credit. That is not really appropriate for high school students. Instead, what we're looking for is really kind of an extended career shadowing experience, something that lasts from a week to 10 days, 2 weeks if the student is exceptionally motivated and has an opportunity that can accommodate them for that amount of time. And it's a much more observational than interactive experience. What a high school internship is doing for students is exposing them to the professional rhythms of a particular workplace, helping them think through if they have the ability or the interest to perform this particular role in their future. A lot of students come away from these internships feeling really excited about their particular future and a particular career. And they provide students with just a sense of empowerment about what they're looking for and what they're looking forward to. Now, securing these internships is typically a family effort. So parents on this call, if your student is interested in an internship, this is your time to shine. I recommend starting with a conversation with your student about, what particular industry or career they're interested in exploring, and seeing who you might know in your particular network, whether it's neighbors, friends, colleagues, old college roommates who have the kind of jobs that interest them, and seeing if they'd be willing to take your student under their wing. All right, pre-college programs. Bob mentioned these pre-college programs. They're terrific summer opportunities. A pre-college program is an academic program that takes place on a college campus that can last anywhere from 1 to 4 weeks. They're usually tailored around a particular academic subject. Some from the past that I've had students do include subjects like fundamentals of sports marketing, architecture discovery, or even, the Infectious Disease Institute. They're the opportunity for students to gain exposure in fields that may not be offered in a typical high school, like architecture or sports marketing. So it gives them a chance to kind of explore areas they might be curious about, and allows them the chance to maybe go deeper in a niche topic that isn't available at their high school. Some of these programs are significantly more competitive than others, and many require an application, which can range from an essay that details why you want to go to this program to something a little bit more intensive that comes with several essays and encourages the submission of test scores and letters of recommendation. Something to keep in mind, as Bob has mentioned, about doing programs on a particular campus is that it is not going to impact your child's admissions at that campus in any way, at least not positively. Your child is not going to get a leg up should they do a program at this campus. Those two offices, the Office of Summer Programs and the Office of Admissions, don't speak to one another. So if there's a campus you're curious about, I recommend approaching it from the viewpoint of, is this a campus I might want to apply to, rather than, if I go to this campus, will it help me in college admissions? Okay, so here's a screen grab of some of our favorite pre-college programs. I encourage you all to take a look at our summer match point directory after this webinar. It has thousands of summer programs, including the subjects, the dates that they take place, the program lengths, and links to learn more about them. Applications typically come due between January and April, so take some time, see what looks good, and throw out any applications that appeal to your student.
So Laura, is there like how to differentiate between programs? Like, are some more valuable than others in terms of whether they're competitive or more like pay to play? Like, does it matter?
So, I mean, most of these you're going to have to pay to attend. So, if your student is interested in a summer program, you will likely have to pay for them. And I want to kind of divorce the value of these programs from the monetary fee involved, which isn't to say that you have to spend a lot of money to have a good summer experience. But I think thinking about these as a chance to develop skills, whether that's in subjects that interest your student, or even skills like gaining independence and kind of social confidence, which happen at these programs because they're a chance to live away from your parents, to explore what life is like on a college campus, to kind of get a taste of college life. I think, those are the kinds of things that these programs can really benefit. If you're looking at, the relative competition of the program, I recommend taking a look at the application requirements. How rigorous is the application? What is it asking of you? Is it asking for your GPA and test scores and letters of recommendation? Or is it just asking for a short essay and confirming you have above a 2.0 GPA? So that's kind of how I would evaluate these, rather than, am I paying to play? Because for most of these you will be, but paying to play isn't necessarily a bad thing when you consider the skills and experiences your student is getting in exchange.
Thank you.
Okay, independent research is one of my favorite topics to discuss over the summer, but it isn't for every student and requires quite a bit of initiative and a willingness to be curious. So an independent research project is the opportunity for a student to develop a sustained inquiry on a subject that interests them. So developing a research question in the area in the area of their curiosity, whether that's biology or English or neuroscience or art history, and reading academic literature, conducting experiments, and understanding what the conclusions that they are looking for might be. Doing an independent research project requires a bit of organization on the part of the student, because as a former academic myself, research projects can quickly spiral out of control and become much bigger and more in-depth than you may have realized. So really picking a manageable, bite-sized inquiry that you might be able to get done over the course of 3 months or so. To make sure that happens, I highly recommend working with a research mentor of some kind. This could be a university professor, a community college professor, someone you know who might have a background in the area that interests you, or, as I'll talk about in a second, doing a research mentorship program. For students who are really interested in highly selective schools, the Ivy Leagues, Ivy adjacent schools, doing a project within the realm of independent research can be a great way to show your intellectual curiosity and show your ability to kind of handle the academic rigor and the intellectual rigor that these kinds of projects demand. Okay, so one way to kind of streamline the independent research work is by working with an organization that specializes in mentoring students through their research projects. This slide is from Polygence, which is a student-led, mentor-guided independent research platform. I've had several students work with Polygence in the past. It pairs them up with PhD students, or in some cases, university faculty within their area of expertise, and kind of guides them through all the steps of independent research, from your initial inquiry all the way through a paper that is drafted and can even be publishable to some extent. There are other programs like this, like Pioneer Academics is one, Empowerly is another, and they just help kind of make the project a little bit more manageable for students and keep students organized throughout. All right, and I want to talk for a second about online courses, which I think are one of the most flexible ways of having an academic experience over the summer. So online courses, I'm not really referring to, like summer school, where you're repeating a course for credit, or, taking pre-calculus over the summer to prepare you for calculus. That's not what we're talking about here. Rather, we're talking about courses that really became popularized over the pandemic through platforms like edX and Coursera and Udemy that are focused on teaching students professional skills, learning about professional industries, and teaching content that can directly help prepare students for particular careers. They're taught from a range of university faculty to kind of leading industry experts, and they're asynchronous. So if you have a lot of travel planned, if you're going to be away a lot over the summer, taking an online course can be an excellent way of kind of squeezing in a fit to major experience without having to be someplace. The other benefit of these is that they're usually quite affordable. I spend a lot of time kind of browsing content on Coursera. The classes are very reasonably priced, and they often run, pretty good sales. So I recommend taking a look, especially if your student is interested in business or healthcare or psychology classes that maybe they don't have at their high school. They can take a look at online platforms to kind of fill the gap. So this is a screen grab of the complete digital marketing course. I recommended several students take this course to kind of shore up on their social media awareness. And for students who might be interested in kind of cutting edge topics like AI, for example, can definitely get a good primer or a view of the overall landscape through courses online.
One of the biggest trends we've seen, particularly over the last several years as standardized testing has become more a focal point again in college admissions, is students focusing on some of their summer in terms of standardized test prep. Michael, can you give us some overview and context for families considering whether and when to include standardized test prep in their summer plans?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks so much. So, for a long time now, SAT prep and ACT prep, which is really what we're talking about here, has been very popular in the summer. And it's pretty easy to kind of understand why that is. In the summer, students tend to have less going on. We all know that students in high school these days are just jam-packed during the academic year. Some might say that they're overbooked with too much going on. So summer becomes a really good time to be thinking about standardized test prep. You have fewer competing academic demands, in particular the months of July and August, right? When you're out of school, these tend to be just academic conflict free. In other words, you can really devise and implement the ideal test preparation program and schedule, which you very rarely have the luxury of doing during the academic year. I always tell parents, test prep does not happen in a vacuum. We work very hard to fit test preparation around students' very busy lives. And that can be very challenging during the academic year. But in the summer, it tends to be a little bit easier just because there are fewer things going on. And we have seen a lot of students, obviously more and more and more students now doing early applications. So the idea of getting in the SAT and the ACT and kind of being done with this process before the academic year kicks into high gear is really, really appealing. This is now true for not only rising seniors, right? Folks who are finishing up junior year, entering their rising senior summer, but even those students who are finishing up sophomore year, entering their rising junior summer, being able to get a head start on SAT or ACT prep, very, very, very appealing. There's a July ACT, which comes at the tail end of the school year. There's an August SAT, which has been very popular for a number of years. There's been a September ACT, which takes place early on in the academic year. And now for the first time, we had the College Board, which maintains the SAT, has announced in this upcoming 2025 schedule of testing, there will be a September SAT. That's the first time we've ever seen that. I believe the date is September 13th. So we're expecting a lot of folks to be very, very interested in that September SAT as well. Now, standardized test prep, like ice cream, like anything, it comes in all different kinds of flavors, right? So what does summer standardized test prep mean? Well, it could mean that the summer part is really the kickoff to a student's SAT or ACT prep. You could be doing your prep in July with the aim of taking that August SAT and then finishing up later on during the academic year. It could mean that you have your sights set on taking the SAT in November, December, March, which is a very, very popular kind of time period for juniors these days. It could mean that you're going to be taking it kind of at the tail end of the school year. This tends to be very popular for seniors who are taking the SAT or ACT for the last time. So it could be, let's get our test preparation in the last few months of the school year with the eye towards taking it in June and August or even the July and September ACT. With the SAT and the ACT being accepted equally wherever schools are looking for standardized testing, we say, look, there is no one standardized test plan that's going to work for every single student. What we do say is there is a test prep plan that is going to work for you. And where I work at Appleruth, what we do is we have students come in, take a diagnostic test with us. Let's determine what your baseline is. Let's determine which test is going to be best. You don't want to be prepping for the SAT and the ACT simultaneously. These tests are different enough where you really do want to differentiate and be, really identify, okay, I'm an SAT student or I'm an ACT student, or I feel much more comfortable with the types of questions on one test or the mode of a test. Let's determine that early so that we can create an individualized plan that works best for you and your student and your family and your schedule. And the summer is an ideal time for students to be taking their diagnostic tests with us, getting an early start. I always say, spend a little bit more time up front early in the summer so you will save yourself a lot of time as you're going on and doing all the things that you need to do in addition to standardized test prep.
Thanks, Michael. One qualitative point that I would make is that we have noticed, particularly over the last several years, a real shift to rising juniors. So the current sophomore class that Michael talked about, rising juniors carving out some part of their summer before junior year to start their standardized test prep. And we anticipate that happening even more so as standardized testing returns as an important input in college admissions. Now, for many families this time of the year, their question is, well, okay, you've given me an overview. How can I plan with my student for this coming summer? And I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues, Delara and Amanda, to give you some sense of some of the ways we've found most effectively for students and parents to plan.
Thank you so much. So I want to talk a little bit about how we help students plan for their summers and the types of things that you as parents can do in terms of starting this conversation and putting things in place that will help them think about the entire arc of their summer experience throughout high school. So as an organization, we use an aptitude test to help students start to understand where they have interests that overlap with innate talents or abilities. And what's really interesting about this exploration for them is that they often find that they are seeing things about themselves, maybe in their classroom, maybe when they are interacting with people in activities. And these aptitude tests help them really define what those skills and abilities are. And then we take it a step further and we say, okay, you have these skills and abilities. This is how your brain and your personality like to interact with information. This is how they like to interact with other people in different situations. These are different career pathways and major pathways that really lend themselves to those qualities that you possess. And then also sometimes students will see something come out of this aptitude assessment and they'll say, I didn't know I had that ability. Like that wasn't something that was really on my radar. And that's also a really great jumping off point to say, well, is that something you want to develop? Right? We can see that there is something in you that is showing that this aptitude, this capability exists, and you've not really flexed that particular muscle yet. Are there ways that we can help you to develop that? And that really in beyond helping them understand career opportunities or major selection opportunities, which are sometimes much further down the line, it helps them improve confidence in testing themselves out and taking chances and really risking the opportunities that they might have avoided otherwise. So we really like this for students. We typically ask students to do it sometime between freshman and an early sophomore year because we think that's a good point along their growth arc. Next slide. And so, when I talk about the growth arc, really what we're talking about is this journey through high school. So students in high school have 3 summers. They have the summer after 9th grade, the summer after 10th grade, and the summer after 11th grade. And I will be the first, and I think all of my colleagues would agree, to say that students are not always on the same pathway. There are students who come to me as 9th graders who are already really focused on initiative and impact. There are students who are with me in 9th grade who need to spend a couple of summers getting involved and really flexing that particular muscle because it's something that's going to need a little bit more time to really percolate and develop. So there's not one single pathway. I want to really make that really, really clear. But this is just an example of how someone, a student's summer engagement could evolve as they go through the high school experience. So what it means to be involved as a 9th grader, it means that when you're thinking about that summer, you're looking back at the school year that you've just had. So right now, students will have been in 9th grade since August. They will have learned a lot about themselves. They will have experienced new interactions, new people, different ways of engaging in their academic lives. They will have experienced new types of academic work. They'll have engaged in new clubs and activities. The kinds of questions we're asking them at this point are, which of the things that you've learned about yourself would you really like to explore if you had more time? Because summer is time. And then we're finding them opportunities that allow them to explore those capacities, those areas of interest, those curiosity points without the added pressure of school life. And so being involved really means testing themselves out in a variety of ways. So a good ninth grade summer, the summer between ninth and 10th grade, is one that's going to put them in a number of different situations. And that could be activities that are top down, right? So they're learning something like in a classroom setting. It could be volunteer work. It could be family travel. It could be self-exploration, deep reading, right? None of this has to cost any money. But it's about having a lot of different facets of interaction. When they're getting to this point of the year in 10th grade, they will have experienced a lot more of high school. They will start to have more choice in the courses that they're engaging in. They will have maybe engaged in clubs and activities at a deeper level, maybe be thinking about some leadership opportunities that are on the horizon. They will be kind of partway through that growth arc of high school. And so we're going to be asking different questions of them. We're going to be saying, okay, not only what do you think you want to explore in terms of your capacities, but really, where do you think these capacities might take you in the future? Right. So we're trying to then apply these to actual real world opportunities. And I'm going to be giving some examples of how we can do this. But let's say you have a student who really loved their ninth grade science and math classes, and then they got engaged in a robotics club, and they'd never done that before, and they carried that through all of ninth grade, and into 10th grade they have started to take on leadership roles in that robotics club. They're thinking of taking AP Physics next year. They might want to think about how they can expand their CS ability. They might want to think about how they can engage in maybe teaching robotics at a local summer camp. They might want to see how they can stretch themselves in different directions. So 10th grade summer is really about diving in a little bit more deeply into areas of interest that have already been established. And then in 11th grade, the summer before that senior year, we're taking it that step further, where we're not only saying, what are your capacities and what direction you might want to take them in, but how can you really push this forward off of your own curiosity, off of your own interest. So typically in 11th grade for students, there might be fewer top-down activities. They might not be as classroom-based. They might be starting research projects, or what we often call passion projects, which are things that can be from the ground up. A student saying, you know what I really love to do? I like to work on cars. So I'm gonna, I've been working on cars and tinkering on cars and doing this as a hobby. Maybe I'll create a business. Maybe I'm going to start advertising my skills. Maybe I'm going to start teaching other people how to maintain their cars. Maybe I'm going to volunteer to do that at a local community center, right? So we're moving kind of away from that top-down, possibly structure, to something that's really taking the student and putting them at the forefront. And so that's kind of an overview of what that arc would look like. The other thing that we would talk to students about, and we all talk to students about, although it really develops as we move through high school, is this concept of chaining. And what that really means is that when a student has latched onto a couple areas of interest, we try and help them find ways to deepen that interest or expand that interest. And those are not necessarily the same things. So I'll give you a couple of examples of students from my history who have linked things or chained things effectively. So let's say you have a student who is really excited about engineering, but they don't know what kind of engineering. So in their ninth grade summer, they might do some courses that are exposing them to the broad range of different engineering topics. In ninth grade, they had engaged maybe in some clubs at school, but they want to take it a little bit further. So they might go away and do a course at a college, or they might take an online course like Delara was mentioning. And they find out what they're really excited about is structural engineering. Like, they find this fascinating. And they come back the next year and they find opportunities to engage in, let's say, volunteer work with Habitat for Humanity. Now, it's not exactly structural engineering, but it's teaching them about structures. It's teaching them about building. It's teaching them about engaging in projects. And then they build off of that, and they start to think about, okay, well, I wonder what sort of building projects are happening in my community. So they reach out to the local planning office and they ask if they can come in and work shadow some structural engineers from the local planning office. And then they go and they work shadow, which means they follow someone and they see, oh, do you know what I'm really excited about? It's not actually structural engineering, it's civil engineering, like the idea that I can go and work on bridges and tunnels. And, that's what really excited me when I did this work shadowing opportunity. So the next summer, they engage in activities and opportunities that deepen that understanding of civil engineering. And that could be through work shadowing or internships or courses that they take, and so on and so forth. So when we're linking things together, we're creating that depth of understanding about what a certain career path is like, or what certain areas of academic interest could be. Delara, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Sure. I would love to include maybe an example from a student who's more interested in a less technical,
Yes.
future major. So for example, actually, I think this may be Allison's student, but I love this story and I'll share it with y'all. There was a student who came through with Allison who, started out being, somewhat interested in business. I think that's a pretty common pathway with a lot of students. Business is one of the few things they know about. It's something they want to explore. She started doing a summer program in business between the summer and 9th and 10th grade over at Wake Forest University, and found out just how much math was involved in business and realized maybe that wasn't the exact approach that she wanted to take. Something I really like to remind students is just because you take an opportunity that isn't exactly what you wanted it to be, or didn't happen to, do what you wanted it to do for you. It didn't spark that love in that subject for you. That doesn't mean it wasn't a good use of your time. A phrase I like to remind students of is that there is always beauty in the pivot. You can always learn something when your interests pivot or take a different track than what you had maybe initially anticipated. Now, what this student ended up realizing is that what she loved most about the business world is interacting with others and being able to make connections with individuals. So what she ended up doing is going back to her school's dance team, creating a position within the dance team as communications officer, who is in charge of kind of running the communication side of a high school dance team, making sure everybody knew about their practice schedules, that everybody got texted before competitions so that everyone showed up at the bus on time, that team bonding events were adequately planned and adequately advertised so everybody could show up and benefit from them. This led her to, pursue a major in communication that started from a place that maybe wasn't what she was anticipating, starting in the area of business, and kind of and pivoting in a way that became really productive and valuable for her. Next slide. Awesome. Okay, so Amanda did an incredible job talking about the way initiative and impact build throughout a high school career, especially when you take a look at the lens of summer planning. But what are some other examples of what this initiative can look like, especially when you think about the range of interests and potential majors that students are pursuing? So some examples of initiative-driven activities based on students' academic interests might include launching a community-based reading program for students in the humanities. I think oftentimes it can be difficult for students interested in subjects like English or art to think about initiative, because those are very kind of solo-based individual activities. So how do you take these more individual activities and make them more community-oriented? So you could do something like a community-based reading program. You could run and expand a reading group through your local library. Artists might consider creating a portfolio or casting and directing in a local performance. Even, something I loved to do when I was in high school was direct theater performances for elementary school students. That was really fun and is an excellent example of initiative. STEM students can consider a range of activities, from designing an app, conducting research, as I talked about earlier, or doing something school-based, like teaching your school about robotics or community health initiatives for students more interested in the medical angle. I want to share an example from a former college Matchpoint student who was listening to the news with her family. And as she was listening to the news, she overheard about a story in Austin about students who, every year would have trouble affording their school supplies, who, really felt and their families were unable to afford what really can be a pretty burdensome cost to buy your books and your textbooks and your backpacks and your clothes and everything. So the student felt especially moved about this predicament. And she spent about a year working with first her family and then later school-wide to create a drive that had families and friends donate backpacks that were then filled with school supplies that she then donated across the county to try and ease this burden for students. So really, you can definitely use our list of ideas for initiative here as a jumping off point. But I think also considering, what are the biggest problems or sore spots in my local school, in my community, in my county, and what are the ways that I can leverage my skills to make an impact on them? Next slide. All right, so as we've discussed at length, summer planning is not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. Everyone's summer looks different, and everyone with just a little bit of planning can have a productive summer. But there isn't a single recipe, especially when it comes to creating plans for neurodiverse students who might just need a little bit of extra care or a little bit of tweaking to their summer plans to ensure that it works for their needs. So we always recommend starting with your students' interests and their strengths. For neurodiverse students, the summer could be a great time to build their social confidence, to help them, think about the ways that their special skills can be valuable in their journey to college, or to help them branch out in their particular interests. You might consider using this, extended block of time that is the summer to shore up their social skills through connection and mentorship with peers. Another thing that's also on the table are summer programs that are designed especially for neurodiverse students that focus on assessing their college readiness, building confidence in their academic abilities, and setting them up for social success. So we've spent a lot of time covering the many ways you can spend your summer, from summer camps to community service, from internships, independent research, all of the things. It can feel overwhelming. I totally understand if those of you on this call might be feeling overwhelmed with your options. And I think, something we often discuss with parents is which opportunity is better than another. And really that comes down to what are your and your students' goals. So here we're offering sort of a metric of evaluation for summer opportunities so that y'all can decide what your own priorities are. What are your and your students' priorities for this summer? What do you hope to learn? What do you hope to develop? That you can then use to evaluate opportunities that interest you. So as always, make sure you start with your students' interests and their strengths. So is this opportunity something that connects to my students' innate strengths and aptitudes? Is this an opportunity that might be something that motivates my student? That's always kind of the first level. Then you can branch out to taking a look at, does this activity help speak to their fit to major? Is it going to help them explore their future major options? Is this an opportunity that will teach them new skills or hone and sharpen skills they might already have? For students who are a little bit farther along in high school, so 11th and 12th graders, you might also consider, or especially motivated younger underclassmen, you might consider, is this an activity that will help demonstrate my students' initiative, and what kind of impact is this activity going to have on them and those around them? And then finally, I think an often under-discussed level of evaluation when it comes to a summer opportunity is financial fit. Is this an activity that's going to fit in our family's budget? As we've said before, you don't have to spend a lot of money to have a productive summer. If a summer program is too expensive or just isn't in the cards this year, as many of them can be because prices are very high for some of these, that's okay. I think that's a perfectly reasonable decision to make. And there are plenty of free and low cost opportunities that can be just as productive for students and their families.
Now, one of the questions that typically comes up is, how do colleges consider summer activities? So in our final section, Allison and Amanda are going to take us through a couple of insights about how colleges consider these important summer activities.
So while we have stated several times that this is not the goal, is to think about what looks good to a college, it is important to think about what is this particular experience, growth experience, ultimately, kind of, I love to think of a student's activities as kind of telling their own story. And then, of course, the student gets the opportunity to actually tell that story when they apply to college in their, essays and applications. So number one, colleges are looking to see, do we see curiosity? Do we see intellectual curiosity? Do we see students pursuing their academic interests? And one of the things that I always point out to my students is, exploration is its own reward. And so, I had a student years ago who spent the first 2 years of high school diving deeply into pre-med, and then realized somewhere towards the end of sophomore summer that that was absolutely not what he was interested in at all, and pivoted to business, became a really interesting business student. So it isn't necessarily, I've got to get this all figured out, but exploration demonstrates a lot of really great things about a student, and a lot of really great things about a student that a college might want to have on their campus. Are we seeing curiosity? Are we seeing, students being motivated just to find out and take action? And more, we are seeing colleges really looking to see if students have connected to kind of an issue or experience that's bigger than themselves. So it's broader than the typical definition of service to include anything that the student's doing that benefits others. So it could be traditional service. It could be, like I said, the student who realized that maybe some eighth graders needed help prepping for the dance team audition, right? And is the student collaborating, communicating with others, and having time to practice those skills. Again, colleges are building a community of people, and they want to see that students have the skills to thrive on their campus and to help others thrive on their campus. And outside of the classroom, specifically summer opportunities, but all outside of the classroom opportunities, are the students' ability and evidence really to show colleges that they do have the interests and abilities that will help them thrive on a college campus. So more and more colleges are looking at skill development, and what skills did a student have the opportunity to develop and then practice, right? And so, and that again doesn't have to happen in a particular area, but it is important for students to kind of be aware of the skills they are developing, right? And so one of the things that we do a lot at ASM College Matchpoint is help students see what they're developing. I just had a meeting with a student today where I was like, hey, during that experience where you were really challenged in your science class, what do you think you learned about how you learn? What do you think you learned about studying? What do you think you learned about how you feel about science, right? And so having the opportunity to not only develop skills, but to also realize that they are developing skills is hugely important for students. And then what is engagement? I always tell students and families, anything and everything, they'll say like, well, does this count? Right? Everything counts. Anything you're doing outside of the classroom that involves your brain, other people, other experiences is engagement, right? And we think about kind of the hierarchy of engagement from interest, like this is a thing I might be curious about, to getting involved, right? To then being more involved. And I always tell students like the real icing on that cake is being engaged yourself and then seeing how you might engage others. And that is always kind of the way to kick it up a notch for a student to take initiative, make an impact, and demonstrate to colleges that they're going to be someone they can count on to do that when they're on their college campus. And I'm going to hand it over to Amanda to talk about what this means at a highly selective college.
So highly selective colleges are really going to be focused on what we would call the initiative part, right? It is so important to recognize that there are so many ways of being involved, but when you're looking at schools that are generally denying at least 10% of their student applicants, really the things that are going to differentiate a student are the things that are going to instruct the school that the student's curiosity is at the forefront of all of their decision making. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is it's not me, it's not Allison, it's not Delara, it's not Bob, it's not you parents making these things happen. Whatever those things might be, it is the student. And so when I'm working with students who are hoping to target highly selective colleges, I can give them all the advice in the world about what that resume might end up looking like. But the key differentiator between students who are going to find success at that level and students who are going to find success somewhere else is whether or not the drive is really internal. And that doesn't exist within all of us, and that's okay. Other things that would help a student's activity resume shine in highly selective admissions would be the level of engagement in terms of where they're participating. Now, Delara and Allison have talked about summer programs, and that is one way of differentiating. There are some summer programs that are exceptionally competitive, more competitive than the most competitive college that you could think of. And those are absolutely programs that certain students might want to apply to, and some students are accepted to. But there are also opportunities that exist academically throughout the school year that students who are targeting highly selective colleges might want to engage in. And generally, in terms of how much influence they're going to have, it would go state, and then regional, and then national, and then international in terms of the competitiveness level of that activity. But beyond that, what colleges also want to see is with these colleges, but all colleges, I would say, honestly, is a willingness to look outside of yourself, to look at the world around you and think, these are the capacities that I possess. This is the curiosity that I possess. And these are the ways that I want to use those two qualities to benefit other people, or to benefit the world around me, to benefit any aspect of the world around them that is interesting to them. So that externality, that willingness and ability to see problems beyond their own experience is another thing that can be really differentiating. In terms of summer planning and summer programming, when you think about that, it doesn't have to be big world. It can be small world, right? What is it in your small world that you can see as a problem, and how can you use your qualities and your capacities to influence someone or something in that small world? So that could be in your home, right? It could be in your neighborhood. It could be in your wider community. It could be in your school. It could be anything. It does not have to be, and sometimes I think this is a really important point for families and students. It does not have to be big world. It can be small world, but they really want that ability to see beyond yourself. Now, STEM students, it adds a little bit more complexity because, of course, not only are they looking at the willingness to solve problems, and I will say that a lot of STEM-focused colleges and universities ask STEM students about a problem that they would want to solve in the world around them that would help other people. But they're also looking for evidence of engagement. And so what I mean by evidence is that when a student does something that could be documented, they should be documenting it. So for example, I talked earlier on about a student who really loved to tinker with cars and grow that out. I could ask the student to write about that in their activities list and on their resume, but would I love for them to have a whole series of documented project portfolio photographs and progress write-ups? Yes, I would. I would love that, because then I can help them put together a STEM-focused resume or a STEM-focused portfolio for the schools that would accept it. They really benefit from having kept that recording of their development in STEM. And so, yeah, that's okay. Go ahead. And so the documentation doesn't just apply to highly selectives, and it doesn't just apply to STEM, but it applies to really anything students are doing through their high school experience. When I take on a client later on, maybe who is approaching the application portion of their journey, and I'm asking them to recall what it was like to be involved in an activity or what they were involved in the summer between 9th and 10th grade, and they haven't kept any records, they haven't journaled those experiences, they haven't kept a resume or kept, notes or even visual record of that experience, it's hard for them to tap into the growth that they've experienced over the course of their high school. So we really recommend strongly that you're documenting, and that can be in resume format that helps students really be organized for the application process, but also, visually, some students have started Instagram handles specifically related to something that they know is going to be important to them long term. So that could be photography, that could be engineering activities, that could be community service. So any sort of representation that they can keep a record of their experience and their growth in those experiences is going to be extremely valuable.
We we have been so grateful to be with all of you this evening. As you can tell, we are college planning nerds. We love nothing more than talking about how to thrive in the summer and how to make the most of the opportunity for a student to take time in the summer and go deep. We want to urge each of you, if you have a teenager, to make this a priority this month. Not just because some of these programs have early deadlines, but because it will also give a student the opportunity to look at the spring and see what she might do in order to do preparatory activities. Thank you all for your time. As we mentioned at the beginning, we'll be sending the materials out in a follow-up note tomorrow. And we wish all of you a great January and an early greeting for a great summer of 2025. Thanks so much. Bye now.